Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to Characters Explained, a series where I cover characters from the game Battle for Neighborville, to ultimately decide if they're worth trying or not. And today's video will focus on the character who almost didn't win this week's poll, that being Electric Slide. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So normally I would start off this section with a history lesson on the character, but because Electric Slide made her debut in this game, I think it's only fair to briefly discuss her history within the game, so let's get into it. If you take a look at the patch notes that the PVZ wiki offers, you'll see a lot of changes. Like, it seems like every major patch in the game had at least one major change to Electric Slide, which is really interesting. I can only imagine how crazy being an Electric Slide main was back in the day. Now, of course, things have calmed down since then, but it's pretty interesting to see that the devs didn't quite know what to do with her. It almost seems like they just kind of threw things together and prayed that it worked out. So now that we have a somewhat clear view of what the developers were thinking, I think we can now discuss what she's all about. Electric Slide has the attack role, which means that she's more of a DPS character than anything else. And because of this, she only has 125 HP. But to make up for that fairly average health, her damage is 15 normally with 18 as a crit, as well as having 18 ammo. This is pretty standard stuff we're looking at, but there is one extra thing that makes her different from every other character, that being her elemental damage. So just in case her name didn't make things obvious, Electric Slide deals power damage. Basically, when two enemies are near each other and she shoots one of them, the other one gets hit as well, just for a tiny bit less damage. And to add on to this, the devs also gave her an extra gimmick, where 6 consecutive shots actually stun an enemy for a second or so, which can make her a great clutch character. So it seems like Slide's pretty good so far, and we haven't even covered her abilities yet, so let's take a look at them. The first ability is Funky Bouncer, which is a throwable bracelet that bounces around. The catch here is that any enemy that happens to get in its way gets caught within the bracelet, which can be a pretty good tool for taking enemies off of a turf point, or even better, just throwing them off the map. Next up is Out of Fight, which is basically Scientist's old energy warp. No, seriously, this is exactly that ability, only with some minor stat changes. Basically, when you enter this ability, you can't run, reload, shoot, or regen health, but in return, you're invulnerable for a few seconds. That is literally the entire ability. I don't know what else I could say. And finally is my personal favorite, Disco Tornado. This ability basically allows you to summon an electric tornado that initially doesn't deal much damage. That is, until you press the activate button. This basically locks the tornado into one place, but in turn it deals 30 initial damage with a constant stream of 10 damage for a few seconds. I'd like to call this one the Oak Deleter, as it pretty much counters him perfectly, with it being able to hit both him and any acorn on top of him. So this is what base Electric Slide looks like. As you can see, it's pretty clear that PopCap had an idea with this character, and yet they had no idea what to do with her. She's still a solid character though, and she can be made even better with some upgrades, so let's cover a few. So I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat this. Electric Slide has a lot of situational upgrades. Like, don't get me wrong, some of these upgrades are pretty good, but for the most part, these upgrades just feel off. I mean, heck, one of her better upgrades, Jazz Hands, is currently completely broken, and it doesn't even work. So yeah, this section was a bit hard to make, at least for me. But regardless, I did find 5 upgrades that I wanted to discuss, so let's get into it. Starting with her primary upgrades, there's Chain Lightning and Jumper Cables. Chain Lightning does exactly what you would assume it does. It simply extends the power effect by 1 extra character, so up to 3 people can now be hit at once. And as for Jumper Cables, this one basically just extends the range of the power effect, so it can hit a second enemy further away than normal. Both of these upgrades have their uses, which is why I wanted to discuss them first. Next up are the ability upgrades I wanted to briefly go over, and honestly, I could only find 3 that seemed useful, and 2 of them are for the tornado, so let's cover them first. The first one is Cooling Sparks, which basically decreases the cooldown time of Disco Tornado by 7.5 seconds when someone is eliminated within it. The second is Turbulence, which makes a tornado have a 33.333, you get the idea, chance of stunning an enemy in the tornado, and the stun lasts for a second. Both of these are honestly great, there's not much else I can really add. And as for the last upgrade, it's Conduction, which basically reduces the cooldown of Funky Bouncer by 2.5 seconds for every enemy you catch with it. Not exactly the best use of 3 upgrade points, but I think an exception can be made. So that's all of the upgrades, which means that we can now get to the last major part of this video, that being the build section. So let's go over the 3 builds I came up with. The first is actually my main build with her, that being Chain Lightning, Cooling Sparks, and Rough Patch. As someone who has used this build for a long time, I can safely say that this build is really good for crowd control. And if you're anything like me, then you'll probably like this one. Next up is a build centered around Funky Bouncer, with Conduction, Chain Lightning, and Refreshing Revive. Conduction rewards good catching with a faster cooldown, Chain Lightning helps clean up any remaining enemies within Funky Bouncer, and Refreshing Revive just makes it worth your while to revive teammates. So all around, this build is pretty solid. And the final build is basically just an alternate attack build, with Jumper Cables, Turbulence, and Combo. This build is basically a what you see is what you get kind of ordeal. There's really not much I could say about this one. It's just for a more defensive playstyle, I suppose. So we've gone over pretty much everything we can with Electric Slide, which means that we can now move on to the big question. Is Electric Slide worth trying? Yeah, I would say so. She's not revolutionary like the other 2 new zombies are, but she's also not weak like Rose is. But we'll get there when we get there. I'd recommend you try her, and if you're not a big fan, then simply don't play her. And with that, I think I'll end this video here. My bad for the later upload. This video was kind of just in the back of my mind, as I have a lot of things I'm working on at the moment. But I want to hear what you guys think. Do you like Electric Slide? Do you not? Well, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're new around here and you like what you see, then drop a like, maybe even subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.